Welcome everyone at home to our Women of Spiegel Grove exhibit. I wanted to take a few minutes to talk to you about the history of women, part of the Hayes family and related to our property here at Spiegel Grove. Women's history, going all the way back to the founding of the American Republic, begins with an era that some historians call Republican motherhood. The lives of women were isolated to the domestic sphere, focusing on raising a family, taking care of a household. But after the American Revolution, men who had founded the Republic saw that the Republic that they created was very vulnerable, and they wanted to preserve it for a long time. And they saw that women had a pivotal role in that. That women, these Republican mothers, had a responsibility to raise the next generation of young men with Republican virtues, valuing things like representative government and personal liberty. So there was an emphasis that women should be more educated than they had been previously. So women started learning new things like history, how government works, philosophy, things that had previously been in the realm of men. Now if you want to come over here, we focus on some of the women of the Hayes family that lived during this time. This is Sophia Birchard Hayes. This is President Hayes' mother. Now, if you were a woman living in the 1800s, one of the worst things that could happen to you is to lose your husband and become a widow. Prospects of remarrying were very, very scarce, and economically, you, for the most part, could not support yourself. Unfortunately, Sophia lost Rutherford's father before Rutherford was even born. He died of typhoid fever. And so she, as a widow, was in somewhat of an unusual circumstance. Her brother, Rutherford's uncle Sardis, was a pretty wealthy businessman, and he helped support her. And so she was able to run a boarding house on her own for the most part in Delaware. And so she was in somewhat of an unusual opportunity, being a female entrepreneur with the financial backing of her brother. Now if we come along this way, we profile Lucy's mom, Maria Cook Webb. Sophia and Maria have very similar stories. Maria's husband, Lucy's father, died when Lucy was about 2 years old. He died in a cholera epidemic in Lexington, Kentucky in 1833. And so she also becomes a widow. Her story is a little bit more commonplace. She had to move back in with her parents. She moves back on her dad's farm. And so her father, Isaac Cook, Lucy's grandfather, helps raise Lucy. And so Lucy ends up adopting a lot of her grandfather's views. Things like becoming a devout Methodist, being an abolitionist, being an outspoken temperance advocate. And so Maria had to kind of give up independent life and move back in with her parents, which was very common for women in that era. The last woman in this section that we talk about is going down a generation to Rutherford's sister, Fanny Arabella Hayes. She is very, very educated. Between the two of them, they're both very bright people. Between the two of them, they both recognize that, between the two of them, she's the smart one in the family. And Rutherford, it somewhat puzzles them that Rutherford gets all these opportunities to be educated formally, and she doesn't. And he actually sends her books from his coursework when the semester is over. He sends them back to her, and she reads them very voraciously. She ran a book club in her community for local women as well. But she has this really excellent quote. When she has children, she observes this disconnect between men and women. And she writes this in her diary. When I possessed a son, I was impelled by a higher motive. I was reading and learning for him. And so I ought to be now for my daughters. But there is something so decidedly unintellectual in woman's sphere, as it is generally filled, that I am sometimes discouraged in attempting to teach them anything beyond basic household duties or skill in that arrangement of a ribbon or the proper adjustment of the hair. Sometimes I feel a strength to oppose the popular current and bring up my girls to fulfill woman's mission nobly, but my resolves are weak, and I am more likely to be borne along the tide of frivolity than to teach them to shun it. So you get the sense of how discouraged she is. She feels like I should be teaching my daughters the same things I'm teaching my sons. But what's the point in the society that she lives in? And so these three women give you a good sense of what life was like for women at the very beginning of the 19th century. In this case, we show things related to Rutherford's mother, Lucy's mother, Rutherford's sister, but there are three pieces that are really, really cool side by side. This is called a sampler. As you would learn the skill of sewing, as many young women did, you kind of had to prove that you knew how to stitch, and this is kind of like an examination of that. This is Lucy's mom's Maria Cook Webb's. If you move to the right, this is a needlework box. Lucy had the skill of sewing. When Rutherford was in the Civil War, she would go down and visit him at camp during the winter, and she would mend the uniform of both Rutherford and the men under Rutherford's command. And if we move up here to the right, we have a thimble belonging to Rutherford and Lucy's daughter, Fanny, who also knew the skill of sewing. So we have three women where Maria taught Lucy how to sew, Lucy taught Fanny how to sew, and we see those family skills being passed down from one generation to the